Welcome to the Flying with the Flock podcast, the best place to get all your Eagles and other NFL related news. I'm your host, Matt, and welcome to whatever episode number this may be. I'm not sure before recording this, but just want to say thank you guys for stopping by once again to this week's edition of the Flying with the Flock podcast. Before we get started, if I could ask you guys to leave a like and subscribe down below, that would be much appreciated. Leave a comment if you enjoyed this episode. But with all the pleasantries out of the way, let's jump right into it. To some headlines around the league as a whole. Let's start off Eagles based. So the Packers put out a request to ban the brotherly shove. They've tried this before, and it hasn't succeeded before. And clearly the Packers are butthurt, severely butthurt, because they were the only ones who were able to defend it well, especially in Brazil. They were able to stop it twice, but then we railroaded them when it came to the playoffs. And clearly they're still upset about that. And overall, I do feel like we own the Packers at this point. As of right now, at the very least, anything could happen next year. But we're living rent-free in their minds, especially the president and CEO. I think his name was Mark Veach. I don't see a world where this play gets banned, and if it does, then in theory, that bans all quarterback sneaks around the league, because they have to ban the play. They can't ban a certain aspect. They can't do stuff like that. Rather, they would have to ban the play as a whole, getting rid of the quarterback sneak for all 32 teams around the league, including the Packers themselves, which they do run not efficiently because Jordan Love sucks, but that's besides the point. If you've ever seen that clip of, I think it was Packers-Falcons, Jordan Love trying to do the quarterback sneak, and he just falls over. He looks like he's half crocked at this point. He looked like he had a few too many beers on the sideline, and he's just stumbling around. That's your quarterback, all right? And if y'all can't get it done with him, then don't go after a team that actually practices that play a lot. According to Sirianni, they go over it over and over and over again, especially in the preseason, to make sure that the snap, the handoff, and everything else goes smoothly. You definitely saw, especially early in the season, especially in the Brazil game, where the snap and the handoff wasn't as crisp as it used to be. But as the season went on, as we got more comfortable, as we got more used to it, overall it became a better play as a whole. I believe I saw a stat somewhere that out of the 127 times the Eagles have run this play, we've converted 108 of them, putting us at 87% completion rate. So it's not unstoppable. You just have to be smart. You have to defend against it well. I mean, you saw teams like the Chiefs in the Super Bowl. What's his face? Chris Jones, defensive lineman for the Chiefs. He went sideways to try to stop it. Well, let's do the math here. If you put three guys in the middle pushing up against one guy who's sideways, who can't really hold back from that, who's going to push the linebackers back, maybe that's not a smart idea. And then he got a neck injury from it. Okay, so let's not be stupid here. All right, let's actually use our brains. Let's actually sit down and figure out how to beat this play, rather than not practicing it ourselves, and also not even trying to discover new ways. Either have defensive linemen jumping over the top, drawing penalties, or you have idiot defensive linemen lining up sideways, pushing the rest of their defense back. Overall, this is on the defense to try to figure this out. If other teams ran against the Eagles and we weren't able to stop it, then it's fair. I mean, we do it to all other teams. Teams were able to do it against us at a high rate, and it succeeded. I don't think I would be able to complain, because nobody's been able to stop it against us for so many years. So overall, I do feel like the Packers are a bit butthurt that we beat them twice in the same season, when this was supposed to be Jordan Love's year, and yet Jordan Love looked pedestrian at best most times. There was a couple times where he looked Favre-ish, but he didn't look anywhere near like a franchise guy this season. So I feel like the Packers are butthurt. You're going to get a few other teams that vote against it. But overall, I do feel like at the end of the day, it's a football play. And if you want to stop it, you better learn. You better actually try to stop it. All right. The next big thing I wanted to talk about was the Matthew Stafford. He requested to seek a trade, but eventually it came out that the Rams are allowing him to test the market to see what his value would be worth if they were to sign him to a new contract or a contract extension. So, overall, I do believe this is somewhat of a smart move from the Rams. It doesn't seem like Matthew Stafford is leaving the Rams, per se. To me, that would put the Rams in a huge predicament because they don't have anybody to be their next franchise guy. They would have to bring in another quarterback. They would have to do something. But overall, I feel like Matthew Stafford, his best spot, especially this late into his career, would be the LA Rams. For me, I do believe that if the Rams were to trade him, there would probably be only a few teams interested in trying to pick him up. The Steelers being one, they're going to be in the quarterback sweepstakes, whether that's Sam Darnold, Justin Fields, Aaron Rodgers, or Matthew Stafford. You also have the Giants, who might be willing to bring in a guy, a more veteran guy, build around him, build a solid team around him, and then bring in a rookie quarterback a year or two later, and then replace him. And then finally, I could also see him going to the Cleveland Browns, who are currently quarterbackless. We'll see how the Browns handle that. I gave my thoughts on that last week. But overall, I do feel like sitting at where things are, the best thing for Matthew Stafford as a whole. I'm not talking about money. I'm not sure how much he would truly be worth, especially at this point in his career. Where, how old is Matthew Stafford? He's currently sitting at 37 years of age. So it's not like he's getting any younger here. So the price tag probably won't be as high as he wants, especially from other teams as well. He's been injury prone the last 2 years. This year was a really solid year from him. He was able to stay healthy throughout the year. But overall, I do feel like this might be a big nothing burger. We're probably not going to get anything out of it. Matthew Stafford will probably stay at the Rams, sign a contract extension that will last him until the end of his career, and then we'll see the Rams continue to build a young defense on a young offensive line, maybe bring in another weapon next to Puka since they're getting rid of Cooper Kupp, and then eventually reload the quarterback position, bring in a younger guy to eventually take over Matthew Stafford's spot. Next up, so this is going to be something I'm going to be doing once a month from here on out. I'm going to be doing mock drafts during the end of every month. So this one I'm doing right before this combine, so stuff can change. I know some quarterbacks are not throwing at the combine, others are not participating, so things could go a certain way. I'm only doing the first round. Let me just get that out of the way. I'm doing the first round, and in this one, I'm doing one trade, which I could see feasibly happening. And I'll get into my reasoning why everybody picked the player that they did, why they did this, why they did that. All right, so we have the Tennessee Titans. An interesting position from the Titans. They need to rebuild as a whole. And overall, I do feel like they either need to take one of the top two guys, at least physically wise, one of the top two guys. They either have to take Abdul Carter, or, who I have them taking at the number 1 overall pick, you have to take Cam Ward. Although I do feel like teams are now going to start prioritizing rebuilding within the trenches first, um, with players like an Abdul Carter or like a eventually we'll see what's his face, the one off, I think Jack Campbell, Will Campbell. We'll eventually see offensive tackles like Will Campbell come off the board early as well, because teams I feel like are going to start, especially seeing what the Eagles are doing, are going to start rebuilding the offensive and defensive line to become as dominant as the Super Bowl winners have been, especially over the last few years. I mean, some of the best Super Bowl winners have had dominant defensive lines and good offensive lines. Now, obviously, the Eagles have the best offensive line. They have the two top-rated tackles in the NFL, with Jordan Mailata surprisingly being the third highest-rated player in all the NFL. So I'm quite proud to sit back and say that after watching him develop, especially since 2020. So yeah, I do have the Tennessee Titans taking a quarterback at pick 1, and I do have them taking Cam Ward. He has a lot of upside, but he's high risk, high reward. All right, he's a great arm talent, but he could also be one of the worst quarterbacks we've ever seen. I'm betting that he has a lot of upside, but it would probably take a couple years to develop. He has a good arm. He's a little bit lazy in the pocket from his film back at Miami. He's just walking around at the pocket. So he's not going to be able to do that here at the Titans, where they have very little offensive line. So, with that being said, I do feel like the Tennessee Titans bring in their franchise guy to start rebuilding around, and they bring in Cam Ward from Miami. Next up, we have the Cleveland Browns. Now, the Cleveland Browns are sitting at an interesting situation. You have Myles Garrett, who wants out. You have Denzel Ward, who also wants out at the same time. They've said that they're not trading either, but I feel like if a team brings along a good enough deal, they'll probably send them packing. So, yeah. Currently, you have a top corner and wide receiver in the draft at Travis Hunter sitting with you, and you also have a top edge player. Who do I think the Browns take? Well, they need a lot of different positions currently. But I do think that the best physical talent, based off of how they play, their mentality, and because they're a Philly guy themselves, would be Abdul Carter. Abdul Carter has stood out to me, especially over the past year, playing at Penn State. He plays with a lot of physicality. He plays with speed. And people have described him, especially his trainers, have described him as a mixture of Myles Garrett and T.J. Watt. Now, if that is true, he could be one of the most dominant defensive players in the entire league in another 2-3 years. Or he could pull off a Jared Verse and become one of a more dominant player this year in his rookie year. So yeah, I do feel like the Browns eventually need to replace Myles Garrett or give him a running mate on the other side, and you can't block both. You're going to have to prioritize one more than the other, and eventually the other one will get open. So I do feel like the Browns have to take the easy pick here, take Abdul Carter, making him probably become one of the better defensive players in the league. Next up, we have the New York Giants. Now, the New York Giants are in an interesting situation where they need a few positions, especially offensive line, secondary, wide receiver, quarterback. So what are they going to choose? To me, initially, before we really got going, I could see them taking Shedeur Sanders at number 3. But as I sat back and thought about it more, I do think that they might bring back a bridge quarterback. They might keep a Drew Lock and play him for a year and bring in a top talent, a running mate possibly at the wide receiver position for Malik Nabers, and also bring in a top corner in the draft to start to rebuild this secondary. So I'm guessing if you guys know at least a little bit of college football, you all could guess by me talking about both the wide receiver position and the corner position, which player I'm talking about. And that would be Colorado's own Travis Hunter. Travis Hunter, again, to me, is a player that could have a lot of upside, but also has a lot of risk because he wants to play both wide receiver and also corner. So I don't feel like he could play the entire time. There will definitely be packages on both sides of the ball where they'll get him in and then bring him off to allow him to have some rest. But I could see him playing both sides of the ball for New York. And then in 4 or 5 years coming to play for Philly. Because that's what New York does. They just bring their greatest players of all time to Philly. So I ain't complaining though. It does make sense, although I feel like they could go quarterback with Shedeur Sanders there. It just makes a lot of sense to me. It just makes a lot of sense to me that they would probably all right. Sorry, I'm dealing with some technical difficulties on mock draft as a whole. Yeah, so this one I won't be able to do any trades. Let's just say that. Next one I'll do trades. So next month I'll work on a better one. I'll do some trades of who will probably trade up for a quarterback. But with all that being said, we have the New England Patriots up at number 4. Patriots need a lot. But to me, they need to protect their franchise guy in Drake May. And leaving the best tackle in the entire draft on the board, LSU's Will Campbell could be a good fit. I forget, let me see, Will Campbell, what's his, he's 6'6". He's 6'6". He's a big boy on the edge. He can defend some of the top SEC defensive players. And overall, I do feel like he might be a good fit. He's a big boy. Vrabel likes drafting big physical linemen on both sides of the ball. So I could easily see them going offensive tackle in order to shore up the one side of the line. I feel like he's a left tackle to shore up the blind side of Drake May. Next up, oh boy, we got Jacksonville. Now, Jacksonville, to me, is in an interesting spot as a whole. I do feel like they need a lot. They need a lot of offensive line, secondary, defensive line. But realistically, they need to start somewhere, and the worst part of their team last year was their defense. And although they have a Josh Allen and they have a Trayvon Walker who's been silently a better defensive tackle in the league, I do feel like they need to add even more people on that defensive line to take away some of the pressure from their main stars. So I could see them bringing in a Mason Graham from Michigan. He's a defensive tackle. Looking at him right now, let's see. He's sitting at 6'3", 320 pounds. He'll probably be 22 next season. So he's a younger guy. So I do feel like the Jacksonville Jaguars take a defensive guy to help shore up this defensive line and help take some of the pressure off of some of their stars on that defense. Now they also need to draft secondary, which I could see them trading back up into the first round to get a good secondary piece if some of them start to fall, like last year. But with that being said, I really see them taking a defensive lineman here, especially early. Now, that could change depending on who they interview at the Combine this weekend. But as of right now, I feel like this is the most confident I could be in who they choose. Next up, you have the Las Vegas Raiders. Now, if I'm the Raiders and I'm Tom Brady and I'm this front office as a whole, we got lucky. The Giants did not choose a quarterback at 3, allowing for probably the guy that they would trade up for, possibly, being Shedeur Sanders out of Colorado. Between the two top quarterback prospects, that being Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders, I do feel like Shedeur Sanders is more the safe pick. Although he doesn't have as much upside as Cam Ward, in my opinion, he also does have a higher floor. He's not going to be. He's going to be more of a pocket passer, which is completely fine. You can win with that in the NFL right now. They just have to reprove it again. I mean, Matthew Stafford's proven it right now, but if you build a right system around him, bring in the right guys, and protect him just long enough so he can deliver a precise ball, and that's the thing. That's the difference between Cam Ward's throwing style. He has touch and distance, but he lacks accuracy, whereas Shedeur Sanders lacks a big arm, but he can get the ball to where it needs to be. He can put the ball in between two defenders and in the wide receiver's hand. Earlier, especially throughout the season, I haven't been as big of a Shedeur Sanders fan, in my opinion. But sitting back and watching a little bit of tape, I do feel like Shedeur Sanders was a better quarterback than what I was giving him. I can easily see him going to the Raiders here. There was already rumors of that back during the regular season. So yeah, Las Vegas Raiders get their franchise guy, and the front office can go to work building around him as a whole. Alright, next up you have the New York Jets. Now, I don't see them taking a quarterback in the next round. Obviously, next month when I do another one, I'll sit back and see who they interviewed, and then based off of what they're going to do from there. The Jets are in an interesting situation where they don't have a quarterback, but I feel like they're going to get one in free agency. Not Sam Darnold, but I feel like they might bring in a Justin Fields. I feel like that's the most likely spot. As of sitting back, obviously last week I said the Steelers would most likely be the best spot for Justin Fields. But sitting back and looking at it, I feel like the Jets would probably take a swing at Justin Fields to bring in a young quarterback to see if he's a guy, give him a 3-year deal, give them an out after year 2. He would cost a little bit, but he wouldn't be the top of the market. So yeah, I do feel like they go somewhere else other than quarterback in the first round. They might draft one later on to be a good backup, but right now I feel like they're going to take one of the better physical talents on the board, and that being Penn State's tight end Tyler Warren. He's definitely a physical specimen, and although I wish he would fall to Philly, I don't think that would happen through the first round. He's definitely one of the better physical overall players in this year's draft. And the Jets, sitting at where they were, there weren't that many consensus picks on who they would take. They could have also taken wide receiver to give a running mate to Garrett Wilson. But I do feel like they take a Tyler Warren, bring in a big body receiver who can run routes and also block at the same time to help Justin Fields have a bigger target. Alright, next up we have the Carolina Panthers, who overall had a pretty good season last year. A lot of injuries, especially on the defense. Looking at it, I do feel like they're probably going to go defensive line. They have a few different people that they could go with. Probably on the interior defensive line. They have a couple of different choices here. I feel like they might take the top defensive guy at the position. On the interior, there are a couple edge players that might be ranked above this guy. But I do think they take Kenneth Grant, defensive tackle out of Michigan. I mean, looking at some of his stuff, he's 6'3", 340 pounds. He's going to turn 22 next year. And bringing him in to be a complementary piece to, who was their defensive tackle? Panthers defensive tackle, Brown. Derek Brown, that's it. A young Derek Brown who's just rehabbing after I believe an ACL. I believe it was an ACL, but bringing in another solid piece to be a running mate with him and able to get at the quarterback a little bit. I do feel like this would be the best decision. Continue to build up the trenches for the Panthers and allow them to shore up a solid defense that Bryce Young can sometimes lean on when he needs it most. Next up, we have the New Orleans Saints. Now, talk about in a bad position. Again, I've said this before, and I will continue to say this. I believe the Saints will be the worst team in the NFL next year, and will probably be the worst team the following year as well. They're most likely not looking at quarterback in this draft. So, with all that being said, I do feel like they bring in a solid piece to go alongside Chris Olave when he's there. They bring in one of the top-ranked players as a whole in the draft in Arizona's McMillan. They bring him in. He's a solid piece right there. He's 6'5". He's a big receiver, 212 pounds, and he's fast from the little bit of tape that I've watched from him. He's a good receiver as a whole. So I do feel like this would be the best player on the board at the minute that the Saints could take to help them improve. And he might also play into Kellen Moore's system, which leans more on the wide receiver as a whole. Next up, we have the Chicago Bears. Bears are sitting at an interesting position. They need offensive line bad. They need a running back. They need defense bad. They could bring in an offensive tackle. They could bring in an interior lineman, though they might be able to wait and hopefully one of those guys drops to them. I have them taking Heisman runner-up Ashton Jeanty at pick number 10 here. Ashton Jeanty is one of the premier physical specimens coming out of this draft, and I do feel like he will help take some of the pressure off of Caleb Williams and add another threat in the passing game for Caleb Williams to hit if need be. Ben Johnson's system, as we saw up in Detroit, leans on the running back a little bit. So, and I don't think DeAndre Swift can get it done. I believe that they might bring in competition for DeAndre Swift, and eventually Ashton Jeanty will take over that running back one starting role. Next up, we have the 49ers. 49ers need a lot, but I feel like they might take a offensive tackle here. Let's see. I feel like they might take probably the top defensive tackle, or not, the second best defensive tackle, but the top available to them, to eventually come in and replace Trent Williams. That would be Josh Simmons from Ohio State. He's played left tackle his entire career. Well, no, he's also played right tackle. According to his stats, he's played right tackle as well. He's 6'5", 310 pounds. He's one of the top prospects, at least at the lineman position. So this wouldn't be a bad player to bring in, eventually to take over the reins from Trent Williams. So I do feel like the 49ers bring in a guy that can eventually replace Trent Williams in the future. Next up, you have the Dallas Cowboys. Now, what do the Dallas Cowboys not need? Well, to me, they need a lot of help, especially on the offensive line. They just lost, they just lost Zach Martin, who just retired. They need help on the offensive line. They need help at wide receiver. They're sitting in an interesting position where it might be hard for them to not take an O lineman or a D lineman. They might need a tackle. They need a guard more than anything. Yeah, I feel like they might take a swing at a guard earlier than they're supposed to. Now, this guy could trend up um, depending on how his combine is and his pro day is. But I do feel like they need to fill that hole, and if they don't do it during free agency, which I don't see them doing, they're gonna have to do it through the draft. So I feel like they take a little bit of a swing here at Tyler Booker, uh, guard out of Alabama. I mean, he's a big boy. He's sitting at 6'5", 325 pounds. He's going to turn 21 by the start of the season, so he's young. Uh, Overall, looking at some of the stats, he mainly plays left guard, which is, I forget what position Zach Martin played. It might have been right guard. Zach Martin. Yep, okay. Right guard. So you could try to convert him over to right guard to fill in that Zach Martin hole. But I do feel like Dallas tries to shore up this offensive line and takes a swing at a guy that might not be as high on everybody else's draft board, but he's a big physical specimen that, if they can properly develop, could become one of the top premier guards in the NFL. Next up, we have the Miami Dolphins. Now, what do the Miami Dolphins not need? Well, I feel like they're probably going to take one of the top defensive players in the draft here. It's between two players. One has a lot of off-the-field issues, which I know the Dolphins do not handle well. And the other guy is a solid performer. He's a top-ranked prospect in this year's draft. And I haven't watched as much tape on him. I got to do that. But I do feel like they might take edge Mike Green out of Marshall. They need to continue shoring up this offensive line, and they need to also continue to rebuild this defense to allow Tua to lean on it when he needs to the most. Next up, we got the Indianapolis Colts. Now, the Colts are sitting at an interesting position where they don't need too many spots. It's more of a prove-it year for the team, and especially their quarterback and head coach. But they need to help shore up this secondary and bring in a guy that could help lock down number one wide receivers. That being Michigan's own Will Johnson. He's currently corner. He could come in, fit in with this kind of team, and help lock down other number one wide receivers like Nico Collins and Brian Thomas Jr. in their own division as well. Again, another team that needs to shore up a lot of different positions. To me, they need to focus more on defense, and that's being the Atlanta Falcons. They tend to focus too much on offense, and eventually that doesn't produce. Although they could bring in a good target for Michael Penix. I do feel like they probably bring in a defensive piece that helps them shore up this secondary. That being probably the second best corner off the board, in my opinion, being I'm gonna butcher this name, Jahdae Barron, corner out of Texas. I do feel like they try to start shoring up this defense, put a running mate alongside AJ Terrell and Jesse Bates as well. So they bring in a young stud who could try to develop his talents here at Atlanta and help, I wouldn't say rebuild, because the Falcons aren't rebuilding this offense or this defense, but definitely start to continue to add pieces, which may eventually have to replace veterans on the team. So yeah, I do feel like the Falcons take one of the better defensive players off the board in Barron at pick number 15. Next up, Arizona Cardinals. They might just take one of the better defensive players off the board, in my opinion. I I do feel like they sit here, they need a lot of defensive help. Uh, Obviously, it might be a more of a prove-it year for Kyler this year, with them already bringing in pieces like Marvin Harrison Jr., who has to continue to develop. But I do feel like Jonathan Gannon probably brings in a new defensive piece for him to toy around with, and they probably bring one of the better defensive prospects in the NFL in the draft, being James Pierce Jr. The only reason I have him sliding so far is because currently there are concerns about off the field character issues, which weirdly enough can impact where players are taken sometimes, where they go to. So I do feel like if he slides this far, the Cardinals would be kind of, any team past this point would be kind of stupid not to take him at this point. So yeah, give me James Pierce Jr., most likely going to the Arizona Cardinals at pick number 16. Next up, we have the Cincinnati Bengals. Bengals are in an interesting position where they have to rebuild this defense almost from the ground up. I almost want to say they take safety here to start rebuilding the deeper end of their defense. But you might bring in a running mate alongside Walter Nolan. Alongside Trey Hendrickson. I kind of just gave away who I think they're going to take. I feel like they might take interior defensive lineman Walter Nolan to help bring off some of the pressure from Trey Hendrickson and help continue to build this defensive front, which could be locked down. But it would probably help if they had some secondary help. I do feel like the Bengals will take corners and safeties, the best at their positions later in the draft, especially in the second and third round. But as of right now, I do feel like they take one of the better defensive players on the board, that being Walter Nolan from Ole Miss. Seahawks need a lot, but to me, they need, especially with their Jason Peters just retiring, I do feel like they need a lot of offensive line help. Everybody wants them to take defense, but their defense really wasn't the major problem. Rather, it was the pass protection and the run game as well. So if they could start shoring up this offensive line, I feel like that might be the major move for this team. And with that being said, I do feel like they sit back here with Dallas not taking one of the top offensive tackles off the board, and with other teams before them not needing an offensive lineman as bad as they probably need. It has tackle Kelvin Banks Jr. falling to the Seahawks at number 18. He probably could have been taken a little bit earlier, but this is just how I see things shaking out. I see them seeing a need, offensive line, taking the top guy at offensive line, and filling in some other offensive lineman positions throughout the draft. Tampa Bay sitting at they're right there. Tampa Bay's an interesting team where they're right there, and they're sitting at the hump that they just need a couple more players to bring them over. I do feel like they probably go linebacker here. They take one of the top defensive players off the board at Jahad Campbell, linebacker out of Alabama, to help fill in that Devin White role there. I feel like they don't need as much. They don't need as much in the draft as other teams might. Rather, they just need to sit back, let the chips fall as they may, re-sign some of their free agents, and then continue to try to push past this the playoffs as a whole. Baker, I do believe, can do it, but I'm not sure the coaching can. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see how they handle this. But yeah, I see them taking the top defensive player at his position, that being Jahad Campbell. Denver needs a lot, but the way things are shaking out as of right now, I do have one of the top prospects as a whole falling this far. That being Luther Burden the third. Not too many teams, especially within this top 20, overly need a wide receiver. It would be nice if they had a second one, but they don't need a wide receiver. And there's already several taken off the board at this point. So it leaves Luther Burden the third fall all the way to 20, which is right to a wide receiver and weapon needing team as a whole. They need tight end, running back, wide receiver, that being the Denver Broncos. I do feel like they probably take the best wide receiver, arguably one of the best wide receivers in the draft, at Luther Burden III at pick number 20. Luckily, he falls this far. We'll see if that happens, especially next month when I redo this again, when I give you my 2.0. But I do feel like Luther Burden falls to Denver, a team that really needs weapons and needs to continue to build around Bo Nix, that being. All right, Pittsburgh, sitting at an interesting position. They need quite a few spots. They might just take the top player that they need right now, and that's being Emek Egbuka, wide receiver of Ohio State. I know his name. I know who he is. I just can't pronounce his name. Realistically, looking at it, they need quarterback. They're probably going to shore that up in free agency. If not, then we're going to be back here next month, and they might be taking a different position. They also might be trading up. They also need corner to go alongside Joey Porter Jr., but I do feel like they need a running mate besides George Pickens, who isn't as big of a threat as George Pickens and who is a little bit more quiet as a whole. But I do feel like Egbuka probably has the best chance of going to Pittsburgh if the chips fall as they may. Next up, we have the Los Angeles Chargers. Talking about needing weapons, they need a whole lot. They need tight end, they need wide receiver, before we even get to defense. And with two top-tier wide receivers just going off the board, and with after this next guy who I'm about to talk about, after him, it's a large drop-off for talent at the wide receiver position. So we're either going to probably see a team trade up in front of the Chargers, maybe with the Bucks, to get a wide receiver. But without doing trades today, if everything were to fall how it would, the Chargers would get the last pretty good wide receiver, being Matthew Golden out of Texas. He would be a solid fit. I'm not sure his play type. I would have to do more. Research about him as a whole. It seems like he recently has really shot up draft boards. So we'll see. He's sitting at 6 foot, 195 pounds. He'll turn 22. So I do feel like that might be the best position for the Chargers to draft in order to bring in and give Justin Herbert more weapons as a whole. Packers are interesting. They need a lot of help. They need a wide receiver one, which I feel like they might try to go get through a trade or through free agency. So that'll allow them to focus more on the defense in the draft. And they need more help in the secondary. And they need more help on the defensive line. So I feel like they might stop, take a look. They could trade back, possibly, for some compensation from a team that wants to trade up from the third round into the second. From the second round into the first. My apologies. But they probably sit back, take the best defensive lineman on the board, that being Derek Harmon out of Oregon. Just looking at Derek Harmon, he's 6'5", 310. He seems like a little bit of a monster. So I could definitely see him going to the Packers here, who needs defensive lineman help as a whole anyway. Vikings, again, need defensive help, and we might see a slide here, like a little, like, 3-4 picks where it's all defensive, like, edge players being taken, possibly, because we have quite a few sitting here. So, I feel like, again, Minnesota, they need help on the defensive line. Continue to build around this young defensive line as a whole anyway. So I do feel like they take the top defensive player that they can get right now, that being Michael Williams, edge out of Georgia, who, looking at some of his just raw stats, 6'5", 265, could be a monster for Brian Flores to develop into one of the top defensive players in the league. Houston Texans, they need a decent amount of help, but I feel like offensive line, they got to take the top guy, top offensive lineman, top tackle, top guard, whoever falls to them. That being right now, Missouri's Armand Embu could be their top guy. The guy that falls to them here, he's 6'3", 314 pounds, going to turn 21 here soon. So I do feel like they just take the top offensive line guy possible in order to help C.J. Stroud have more time and develop, which was one of their biggest Cardinal sins last season, which was that they did not give C.J. Stroud enough time to deliver the ball, which hindered the way that he looked, especially in the eyes of many football fans. So, yeah, give me Armand Embu to the Houston Texans. Next up, we have the Los Angeles Rams. Rams they have a good defensive line, but they need secondary help. And a guy that's slid a little bit, being Malik Starks. Malik Starks is a safety out of Georgia. I mean, looking at him, he's 6'1", 205 pounds. Although they have a good defensive line over at Los Angeles, they need to continue to shore up this secondary as a whole and help them lock down. Although they're able to get pressure off the line, which allows for quicker passes and sometimes a couple of flubs here by quarterbacks, if they could bring in a guy that could shore up the deep pass and cut that and take out a receiver out of the game as a whole, I feel like it might make this defensive line even more deadly than it is currently. So yeah, give me Malik Starks going to the Los Angeles Rams at pick number, I forget what pick it is, at pick number 26. Ravens. Ravens are in an interesting position as well. They might just take one of the top. All right, so they need secondary help. They need pass help. Secondary help. I've been saying that the entire time. Although you might want to get Lamar weapons through the later rounds of this draft and or possibly through free agency or trades, they need help in the secondary. Kyle Hamilton and Marlon Humphrey can't do it on their own. And I know they brought in a corner last year, Nate Wiggins, but I do feel like they need more. So they're going to take the top corner in the draft right now. They're going to take Trey Amos out of Ole Miss, the top corner. I mean, looking at some of his raw stats, he's 6'1", 190 pounds, so he might be a little bit more able to cover the wide receiver that goes deep. He's a little bit lighter, so he might be able to do that rather than out trying to muscle a physical wide receiver in the flat or on a crossing route. So give me Trey Amos to the Baltimore Ravens at pick number 27 to help shore up the secondary, which I noted even early last season would be one of their biggest Achilles heels. Detroit, if they don't pick up defensive help in in free agency or through a trade, which I feel like they might, they're definitely going to do it through the draft. And the top players sitting on my board right now being Shamar Stewart, edge out of Texas A&M. Currently, they need their defense to be a little bit younger rather than on the older side, and so they don't get injured as much as they used to. So I do feel like they just sit here, take the top defensive player available to them at pick number 28, that being Shamar Stewart. And the rest might be history here, folks. Detroit just takes another defensive player to help shore up the other side of the defensive line from Aiden Hutchinson. Next up, we have the Washington Commanders. Normally, I would say that they need a weapon to help shore up, help giving a running mate to Scary Terry and give Jaden Daniels another weapon. But they should focus on re-signing Dyami Brown back and try to bring him back on a 2-3 year deal for a little bit of money. It's probably going to be more than they want to give out to Dyami Brown, but they're going to have to do it anyway. They might just take one of the top edge rushers available to them, that being Nick Scorton, edge from Texas A&M again, the running mate to Shamar Stewart. So yeah, I feel like they just sit back, take the top edge player, defensive lineman player, since they got rid of Montez Sweat and Chase Young, and one of their weakest positions last year was the edge, which really showed during games like the NFC Championship game. So yeah, give me them bringing a young stud to help shore up this defensive line, especially on the edge. That being Nick Scorton out of Texas A&M. Bills need a lot, but I feel like they need to focus more on the defense, and there could be a couple players they take here. They could take Demetrius Knight Jr. from South Carolina. He's a linebacker. They could take Darius Alexander. I feel like they might take Darius Alexander, defensive tackle from Toledo. Looking at some of his just raw stats, he's 6'4", 310. He's a big boy that you can put at the center of the line and draw some of the attention away from the edge players like Von Miller or Greg Rousseau. So I feel like they try to bring in some youth into this defense, especially on the defensive line, which is more age than some of the rest of the positions around the defense as a whole. And they just bring in somebody that can get at the quarterback. Looking at some of his stats here, yeah, he seemed to be able to get to the quarterback a little bit more consistently the last 2 seasons as a whole. So yeah, give me Darius Alexander to Buffalo. Next up, we have the Kansas City Chiefs, who need offensive line help as a whole. And if they don't trade up and they don't do a lot through the free agency or through trades, they're not going to have too many picks of their own selection here. I feel like they probably take more of a proven guy rather than a prospect, that being Josh Cornerly Jr. from Oregon. Although he's not the top defensive tackle available, the other ones seem to be more like raw projects, which the Chiefs do not have time for, especially if they want to go out and try to win the Super Bowl again next year. They need to bring in offensive line help. Josh Cornerly played a lot of left tackle, so they could shore up that side of the line, and they can continue to build a good offensive line around Patrick Mahomes. It doesn't have to be great, but it has to be better than what they showed out during the Super Bowl. Now, finally, we get to the last pick, and the Philadelphia Eagles are kind of sitting here. What do they do? What do they do? Well, I feel like anyway they're going to trade this pick and bring in a guy from maybe Cleveland, maybe name Myles Garrett. Who knows? I pray a little bit that we bring in Myles Garrett to help shore up this edge. But if we don't, let's just say hypothetically we don't, and we sit here at pick number 34. The one position that I will continue to harp on needs help is going to be the edge. With losing Brandon Graham, Josh Sweat, and relying on a Nolan Smith coming off of a torn tricep, and Jalix Hunt, who both I believe can continue to develop. We need more depth at the position, so I feel like we take the best edge player available to us, that being Boston College's Donovan. Oh boy, I'm just gonna say Donovan E. It's spelled Ezeiruaku, and if we draft him, I'll actually learn it. But till then, I do feel like this is the best. If this is how the chips fall, this is the best possible player for the Eagles to take right now. I thought about bringing in a tight end, possibly Colston Loveland, or bringing in a top-tier defense, or bringing in a top-tier linebacker like Georgia's Jalen Walker. But to me, it just makes the most sense to bring in Donovan Ezeiruaku, edge from Boston College, to help shore up the position as a whole and bring in a little bit more depth. All right. So with that being said, I want to thank you guys for stopping in for this episode. I know it was more just talking about the draft, but that's the next thing we're going to really have to gear up for as a whole. Although it might be fun trying to predict free agency and stuff like that. It's a little bit harder, and I'm not as well versed yet. I'm still learning, and I'm really getting into it for you guys. But I'm still learning how contracts totally work as a whole, rather than saying that guy should get paid this much. Rather, I want to be more precise. I want to find a website that can help me be more precise. But till then, we're going to focus more on the draft, and I'll talk about headlines around the league and what teams need to do to help improve themselves as a whole. So with that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Please, again, leave a like and subscribe. And with all that being said, go Birds.